What you're about to hear isn't something you'll find in textbooks or glossy relationship blogs. It's not something therapists will admit or pop culture will dare touch. This is the truth that lies beneath the surface of polite society, a truth smothered by modern psychology, quietly scrubbed from academic journals, and buried deep in the vaults of historical archives. It's a truth that, once revealed, permanently alters how you see the world, particularly how you understand female longing. This isn't fluff, this isn't theory. This is what Sigmund Freud saw and feared, what he noted privately, what his protégés buried, and what institutions, terrified of its implications, tried to erase. But like all powerful truths, it survived in shadows, waiting to be unearthed. We begin not with a theory, but with a case, one that Freud himself kept largely off the record. The year was 1895. A young aristocratic woman named Anna von Lieben arrived at his door. She came not seeking comfort, but deliverance from her own compulsions. She was gripped by inexplicable seizures, sudden paralysis, and urges so violent they shocked even the father of psychoanalysis. Freud dug into her subconscious, peeling back layers of repression like skin, and what he discovered unnerved him. Anna's dreams weren't sweet, they weren't gentle or romantic. They were violent, messy, humiliating. She fantasized about being conquered, controlled, even hurt, not metaphorically but literally. And the most disturbing realization, her fantasies weren't anomalies. They were consistent, repeatable, and shared across other women Freud treated. He didn't chalk it up to trauma. He didn't dismiss it as sickness. He observed, recorded, and realized he was staring at something ancient, something deeply ingrained. In a letter never meant for public eyes, he wrote, "The modern woman is a costume draped over a tempest. Beneath lies a storm of craving, unbound by morality." This wasn't a one-off. Freud's work with a girl named Dora, an intelligent teenager sent to him after accusing a family friend of impropriety, took the darkness even further. What Freud found in Dora's mind was a fire that contradicted her words. Outwardly, she accused the man. Internally, she responded to him, not with fear, with desire. What shocked Freud was not that she was disturbed. It was that she wanted the chase to continue. When it stopped, her world unraveled. He called it the erotic tension of resistance, a paradox where refusal becomes fuel, where desire intensifies when satisfaction is denied. It wasn't just sexual, it was psychological. Rejection didn't extinguish passion, it ignited it. You've seen this, haven't you? The stories society tells men that all desire should be clean, kind, and consensually eager, that a simple no always means no, and that real attraction is mutual, easy, and safe. But human biology doesn't operate on clarity. It thrives on ambiguity. The female libido doesn't submit to logic. It dances on the knife's edge of danger and restraint. Go back through history. Cleopatra didn't seduce empires with submission. She wielded resistance as her sharpest tool. Noble women in medieval Europe became icons of desire, not by offering themselves, but by withholding everything. Poets and knights chased phantoms, bled for glances, wrote ballads for women who would never say yes. Why? Because denial is the oxygen of obsession. And yet we pretend this doesn't matter. We've built a culture on sanitized narratives of mutuality. But even Freud knew what modern psychology refuses to face, that lust doesn't grow in comfort. It needs tension. It needs polarity. One of Freud's most incendiary conclusions, mocked and misunderstood for decades, was his concept of what he called penis envy. Dismissed today as outdated nonsense, the term was never about body parts. It was about power, about who takes and who waits, about the hunger for agency. He argued that female desire is shaped not by anatomy, but by imbalance. Women raised to receive ache to be overtaken. They're conditioned by a culture that tells them to wait while their bodies scream for pursuit. This isn't about degrading women. It's about revealing the mechanics behind the fantasy. Why are the most liberated women still drawn to tales of submission? Why do romance bestsellers so often feature ruthless billionaires, mafia bosses, and arrogant bad boys? Why has the normalization of female independence coincided with an explosion in erotic culture that revolves around dominance? It's not contradiction, it's biology. When Alfred Kinsey published his groundbreaking research on sexuality in the 1950s, he discovered something he dared not trumpet. During experiments measuring physical arousal in women, his team found that narratives involving forced seduction triggered stronger physiological reactions than mutual love scenes. The body betrayed the mind. The reactions were involuntary, unmistakable, and deeply inconvenient. Kinsey hid the data. Why? Because it upended the feminist utopia in progress. Because acknowledging it meant reckoning with a truth society wasn't ready for. That craving and morality are often at war in the human heart. So where does this leave men? Confused, misinformed, damaged, conditioned to be soft, understanding, and endlessly respectful, taught to give everything women say they want and punished when they do. Let's talk about Edward. The year was 1908, a rising lawyer, educated, stable, decent in every way. He adored his wife, never raised his voice, never pushed boundaries, and she hated him for it, not at first, but over time, she pulled away. She mocked him in public. She left him for a man who had none of Edward's refinement, but all of the qualities she couldn't speak aloud: dominance, unpredictability, fire. Freud saw the pattern and gave it a name: moral castration. Edward had emasculated himself in the name of goodness, and it made him invisible. Now look around. What Freud saw a century ago is now a pandemic. Men under 30 are abandoning dating altogether. Celibacy rates have tripled. Apps that promised connection now funnel all female attention to the top 10% of men. The rest are ghosts, swiped away without thought, buried under digital rejection. And who are the men thriving? Not the polite ones, not the agreeable ones. The winners are those who understand tension, who create chase, who embody danger in controlled doses, not cruelty, mystery. A study out of Norway in 2018 painted a chilling picture. Women rated over 80% of men as below average in attractiveness, not unremarkable, below the baseline. In other words, invisible. The same study showed that many women would rather share an elite man than settle for a stable one. Why? Because repetition is death to passion. Freud called it the boredom reflex. Desire isn't sustained by comfort, it's reignited by uncertainty. In today's swipe economy, women chase novelty because they're hardwired to. That's not culture, that's evolution. Let's go further. In the mid-20th century, another pioneer, John Money, followed in Kinsey's footsteps. He interviewed women, measured their responses, and found a terrifying duality. They said they liked kind men, but their bodies reacted to something else entirely. Images of dominant figures, cold expressions, even mildly aggressive body language triggered heart rate spikes, dilated pupils, and measurable arousal. They were saying one thing and reacting to another. And instead of exploring that conflict, Money did what many others have done. He buried it. But it didn't stay buried. You see it in literature, in porn, in politics. The rise of dominant men isn't accidental. Women fund it. Women obsess over it. They dream of chaos, not because they lack self-respect, but because they are wired to test strength. That's why the worst offenders in society, the rebels, the rule breakers, the provocateurs, often have the deepest followings. It's why aloofness is read as power and predictability as weakness. But don't misinterpret this. This isn't about blaming women. Freud never claimed they were malicious. He said very clearly that women don't choose their desires any more than men do. The problem is that women are allowed to lie about them, and men are punished for revealing the truth. Look at the infamous Stanford prison experiment. While it's always framed as a lesson in power and cruelty, the real story is in the sidelines. The female researchers, who publicly condemned the guards' brutality, were visibly drawn to those same guards. Off camera, their behavior shifted. Politeness became flirtation. Interest surged toward the authority figures. The same patterns echoed in historical contexts far more disturbing. In totalitarian regimes, women often flocked to the powerful enforcers, men they claimed to hate. The same paradox again and again. The erotic mind does not consult the ethical one. So what does that mean for you? It means if you're losing the game, it's not because you're unworthy, it's because you were handed a faulty playbook. You were told to be good when the world rewards gravity. You were told to be transparent when mystery is what triggers the chase. Do you become cruel? Number. You become aware. The ones who win don't play to resentment. They play to understanding. They don't plead. They lead. They don't seek approval. They assume it. They don't manipulate. They master tension. Because at the end of the day, it's not about dominance or submission. It's about polarity, magnetism, friction, the electric space between opposites. But we're just scratching the surface. In part 2, we go further, into the silent war being waged on masculinity, into the weaponization of guilt, into the psychology behind ghosting, addiction to toxic men, and the ultimate truth Freud left behind, a revelation so disruptive it threatens to collapse everything you thought you knew about attraction itself. It didn't begin with swipes or slogans. It began when the rules changed, and no one told men. While they were being groomed to be agreeable, tender, and endlessly available, a quiet war unfolded across bedrooms, screens, and legal systems, not one waged with armies, but with contradictions, promises that made men soft, then mocked them for it. And the most dangerous part, this shift was foretold, not by pundits, by the same man whose work the world tried to bury. Freud warned of it over a century ago. He said society would one day demand that men blunt their instincts, suppress their urges, and sterilize their strength. That civilization would shame raw male energy and then ask why women weren't attracted to what remained. That time is now. To see the damage, don't look at statistics. Look into the eyes of the average man under 30. The confusion, the defeat, the quiet resignation. They've followed the script. Get educated, be respectful, listen, accommodate, and still ended up invisible. Romance has become performance art, attraction, a riddle, affection, rationed like currency. To understand why, you have to revisit the parts of history no one talks about. In 1927, a man named Wilhelm Reich, once Freud's most daring student, set out to find the truth about female longing. He didn't ask aristocrats or academics. He interviewed women in the slums of Berlin, in laundromats and brothels, women who had nothing to lose and no reason to lie. Their answers were fire. They didn't want equality. They wanted a force stronger than themselves, not a partner who mirrored them, but a man who could override them. One woman said, "I don't want a soulmate. I want someone who walks through walls to get me." The authorities burned Reich's work. It was too volatile. But the truth didn't burn with it. It whispered in the margins, echoed through time. Fast forward to today. The same script has been rewritten 1,000 ways. Men are told that dominance is abuse, that masculinity is a disease to be cured, that being soft, pliable, and apologetic is the road to her heart. But it isn't, and the proof is in the aftermath. A study in 2020, published quietly and ignored quickly, revealed a reality that rattled its own authors. Women were significantly more fulfilled. not just sexually but emotionally, with men who displayed decisive traits, assertiveness, initiative, the willingness to say no. These weren't Neanderthals. They were simply men who knew who they were. It wasn't about violence. It was about voltage. Why does this matter? Because the stories men are told don't match the outcomes they get. Boys grow up learning that if you're kind, she'll choose you. If you're safe, she'll stay. If you're patient, she'll fall in love. Then they meet reality. They get ghosted for the aloof guy, replaced by the one who never texts back, friend-zoned by the woman who rants about her ex but still sleeps with him, and they start to wonder, am I the crazy one? Number they've just been lied to. This isn't about being mean, it's about being magnetic. You don't win by being agreeable, you win by being anchored, immovable, unshaken. And Freud understood that at the deepest level. He coined a phrase that has since been erased from polite discourse, the hedonic treadmill. He observed that humans, and women especially, adapt to comfort with astonishing speed. What once thrilled them quickly becomes expected. What was rare becomes routine, and what was routine becomes repellent. The man who gives her everything she asked for often ends up alone, wondering why she left. She didn't leave because he failed. She left because he succeeded too completely. Challenge breeds desire. Predictability kills it. Still think this is exaggerated? Let's talk dread. No, not fear. Dread, as studied by evolutionary psychologists in the late 20th century, is the subtle knowledge that you could lose something at any moment, and it's one of the most potent aphrodisiacs in human psychology. David Buss, one of the world's leading researchers in mating behavior, found that women were consistently most drawn to men who were desired by other women, that their attraction peaked not when the man was available, but when he was slightly out of reach. Jealousy wasn't a flaw, it was a trigger. And it holds across cultures, economies, belief systems. The tribes in Papua New Guinea, the skyscrapers of New York, the principle remains. A man who orbits a woman too closely becomes background noise. A man who moves through life on his own terms becomes an object of obsession. This is the cruel joke. Women may say they want full access, but they only value what isn't easily held. So what does a man do? Harden his heart? Number, but he must reclaim his center, what Freud called frame control, the art of remaining emotionally grounded, no matter what storms rage around you. Let me give you a story. Michael, age 32, an engineer, brilliant, supportive, everything the self-help books say women want. He did the birthday surprises, the home-cooked dinners, the endless compliments. And then came the line that haunts modern men, I love you, but I'm not in love with you. That sentence has ended more relationships than cheating. It signals not betrayal, but boredom. Michael had become safe, a soft place to land. But what she needed, what she wouldn't dare admit, was edge, risk, presence. Freud saw this long before dating apps. He knew that emotional scarcity is seductive, that what we fear to lose we value more, give freely, and it becomes worthless, hold back strategically, and it becomes priceless. But how? How does a man pull this off without becoming manipulative? First, understand this. Silence is not absence, it is pressure. When a woman pushes, the reflex is to explain, to reassure, to promise. But that deflates tension. Freud taught that female cognition fills empty space with meaning, that silence is a mirror, and in it, she sees herself, her fear, her desire, her questions. You must resist the urge to fill every gap. Second, be decisive. Leadership isn't aggression, it's clarity. In a 2022 study, Women reported significantly higher attraction when men made plans without asking for input. Not because they lacked opinions, but because decision-making radiates competence, and competence is erotic. Third, practice the reward cycle, not as punishment, but as clarity. When she aligns with your vision, you amplify connection. When she veers off course, you don't argue. You withdraw, not forever, but long enough for her to recalibrate. Attention is currency. Spend it where it multiplies. None of this is cruelty. It's calibration. You're not playing a game. You're restoring the balance that modern society tried to erase. And at the root of all this lies one final terrifying truth Freud hinted at, but never fully published. That female desire isn't really about women at all. It's about the man's relationship to himself. The second you pedestalize her, she begins to drift. The moment you center your life around her needs, your light dims in her eyes. Not because she's ungrateful, but because biologically, she's wired to follow, not lead, to admire, not parent. The deepest female attraction is not to a perfect man, but to a man who doesn't need her validation, who moves with gravity, who, if she disappeared, would not collapse, but continue rising. This is the secret Freud couldn't publish. That desire is asymmetric. That mutuality is an illusion. That balance may sustain a marriage, but tension fuels the flame. Let's go deeper. In 1936, a Hungarian psychoanalyst named Sándor Ferenczi, one of Freud's boldest allies, ran a now-lost experiment. He recorded two male voices. One was gentle, conciliatory, eager to please. The other? Calm, slow, deep, commanding. He played them for women in a controlled study. 87% of participants reacted physiologically to the second voice. Higher heart rate, flushed skin, dilated pupils. But when asked, they claimed to prefer the first. They rationalized, they lied, not out of malice, but because the mind is often the last to know what the body already screams. Modern neuroscience confirmed what Ferenczi hinted at. In 2019, UCLA ran fMRI scans on female subjects showing images of kind, smiling men. Nothing happened. Then they introduced stern faces, dominant energy, displeasure, command. The pleasure centers of the brain lit up like fireworks. Dopamine flooded in. Not because the women liked being hurt, but because resistance created craving. This is the defiance reflex. The paradox that the more she pushes against dominance, the more her subconscious responds to it. Have you ever seen it in real life? A woman complaining about a man she hates, yet continues to see him. Another who confesses she's confused, but always runs back to the one who ghosts her. These aren't glitches. They're expressions of a psychological filter system as old as humanity itself. Women test, constantly, not consciously, not cruelly, but biologically. Every time she creates chaos, she's scanning for strength, not in words, in presence. And most men, they fail. They try to fix, to explain, to negotiate. And with every plea, they fall further from the throne she wants to see them on. In 1951, a forgotten experiment by Erik Erikson uncovered something haunting. In nearly all long-term relationships he studied, a shift occurred. The man, initially the emotional anchor, would soften over time, compromise more, show more feelings. And eventually the woman would confess, often in guilt, that she no longer respected him. Not because he was weak, but because her instincts interpreted his emotional surrender as instability. One woman's words captured it best. I asked him to open up. When he did, I didn't want to touch him anymore. That's the tragedy, that modern relationships often sabotage themselves by doing everything right. So, what's the answer? Polarity, Not dominance, not submission, but magnetism. The kind that doesn't beg, that doesn't chase, that radiates. The man who wins doesn't scream. He stills, he doesn't explain, he demonstrates. He doesn't fear loss. He embodies value, and in that presence she melts, not because he forced her to, but because her wiring had no choice. When she argues, don't match her volume. Quiet is stronger. When she tests, don't flinch. Smile. When she demands certainty, offer direction, not compromise. This isn't manipulation, it's masculine clarity, and she's starving for it. Because beneath every fantasy of being taken, of surrendering, of being overwhelmed by a man's certainty, there's a deeper yearning, a craving to rest, to finally let go, and that, more than charm or wealth or aesthetics, is what she's chasing. The moment you live by your own compass, everything changes. You become gravity, and gravity doesn't chase, it pulls. Now ask yourself this. What if all the heartbreak you endured wasn't because you weren't enough, but because you gave too much, too easily? What if you stopped giving and started leading? What if you stopped chasing and started becoming? Type the word liberate if you're ready to become the man she cannot look away from, not because you demand her attention, but because you command her imagination. Because in the end, you weren't rejected. You were simply playing the wrong game. And now you finally have the rules.